Tom Peterson and I were working at a small winery in Calistoga. And he'd made a guitar. He'd gone to GRD, Charles Fox's school back east. And he knew this business, Bill Lewis Luthier Supply, was for sale up in Vancouver, Canada. We talked about starting our own business, and he knew of this, and we got together and able to get a little bit of money together and moved it down to Healdsburg in a big van. We bought mostly bending iron parts, it seemed like. Didn't seem like there was a lot of wood or, you know, it seemed like there was a lot of garbage really when looking back at it. And we didn't, we had no soundboard suppliers. He said, well, people will come in and just bring us billets of spruce or cedar or something like that, and we'll cut some tops. But we never got any of that, so we were, I remember the first years we were really struggling trying to find top woods. We could get European woods, but they weren't easy to get. There were a few suppliers then that we knew of, Dotsauer and Fuchs, but a lot of these guys we didn't know. We took a lot of letter writing to, I don't know, the equivalent of chambers of commerces, I suppose, overseas chambers of commerces, that sort of thing. Any trade arm of the consulate, maybe we could write in San Francisco or something like that, but you know, we had no supplier for Indian rosewood. Bill wanted to supply us Indian rosewood through his relationship with Noggle, the current owner of LMI. But we didn't really deal with that too much, and then Michael Goering was a supplier who was one of Bill's best friends. Resources were quite limited, and I don't know, just somehow or another over the years we were able to get enough wood and enough parts and enough tools and things to keep the thing going. Place ads and things like Sing Out, or well, there was Frets magazine. We'd have ads there. We'd try to get the back of people's books. We'd hear if somebody was going to publish a book on guitar making or something like that. Would, you know, ask to be a source. A lot of letter writing in those days, and we had a mailing list. I think it was 2,000 people, including, it was mostly Canadians and Americans, a handful of people from overseas. Of that mailing list, I don't know, not many of them were really that good, real bona fide addresses, you know. Yeah, it just took a long time to build up a database of names and builders, and you know, we're on the phone a lot. Later on, I bought Tom out. Maybe we started in '78. And I bought Tom out in probably '82 or something like that. I think Ribbecke came around '85 or something.
About 85 or
About
something.
85, and then you know, it just continued, and you know, a sale. You know, as they say, the golden era of guitar making. I suppose it was a little after that, but for a while we were doubling sales every year, and it was a good thing and a bad thing, because it, you know, we're growing really too fast, and we really couldn't finance the growth, and so at a certain point I had to get help, and that was that ended up being the owners of Theodore Noggle, 95, and they bought us. So that's the current LMI now. So right around 85, I think, you know, started getting kind of right around when Tom came, and a little bit later Charles Fox moved in next door to us. We were getting to a pretty interesting synergy going, you know, with there was a handful of other luthiers that moved in just because we were like the only game in town, the only supplier. In those days, Sir McDonald was just doing banjo parts pretty much. International Lutherie Supply, I believe, in Tulsa, but they were sort of winding down. Yeah, there really wasn't much, there really weren't that many other suppliers or sources out there. It'd be a guy here or there who was sell tops or something like that. And just about that time, Steve McMinn was working for, I think he was working for the Forest Service and clearing trails or logging trails or something like that. And he would supply us 20 or 30 tops that he'd get from just fall down of cedar or spruce or something like that. You know, that now, of course, is that specific rim tone woods. Probably the biggest supplier of tone woods in the world now. So everybody was kind of like that in those days, I suppose. I talked to Tom and Charles, because I wanted a couple of builders, to be involved too. And I think Tom's good idea was to get David Lusterman of Spring Letter Press involved, which kind of helped ramp it up very quickly. And
Well, remember, your idea originally was, let's put on a guitar maker's picnic. And I never forgot that, because to me it was one of the spirit of the show. And then what you said is we would brainstorm because we were so physically close all day. And the subject came up, well, let's call the major makers out there. And I knew most of those guys, and Charles knew everybody else. And I got on the phone and just called people continuously for 2 or 3 weeks. And I talked about this. Everybody got excited. And that's kind of how it got off the ground. It started as a very sort of unambitious. I remember you came up with the concept of the guitar maker's picnic, and I loved that. And it grew so fast once we got it going.
Yeah. We held it up at the Villa Chanticleer, which is a nice venue, very sort of up in the hills, Fitch Mountain, and just about the right size. Problem was parking there. There's not really quite enough parking to bring a lot of public there, but it was a nice event. Everybody really enjoyed it that first year. Well, at that point, the Germans, they owned the company. I had a small ownership, but nothing that was of any real value. And they didn't want us to do the festival. And we said, oh, this is such a good idea, we're going to do it anyway. So we and then that year, it was mentioned in the Economist magazine and all this stuff. It got such good press. And then after that, it was, they were pretty happy with it, at least for a while.
It took on a life of its own, because I think there was really no show with quite that spirit, and part of it is because almost everybody, as Todd as a figure in the world of lutherie, everybody knew who Todd was. We all knew and trusted him. He was not an interloper. He wasn't an individual that we felt was anything but sincere, and he had pretty much helped every major maker that I know in some way, shape, or form. So it was really, we had come out of a period where the lutherie business was good, but it wasn't crazy, and so we had a sort of familial feel. So the way we all operated together was in that way. And everybody came because we called them, and they came to this. But then it was commerce, and all of a sudden people I remember sitting at Asia at meetings at the Association of String Instrument Artisans and the Guild, and 2 years before that, everybody was trying to figure out how they're going to get home. And then somewhere in the beginning of the 90s, everybody had PDAs and cell phones. People were bidding on $5,000 guitars to support. All of a sudden, the business really exploded. When you wrote that catalog, you sort of fueled that business in the sense that catalog is a pantheon of all of us that Todd kind of get a lot of people to write for the. So he had a sort of a Smith and Hawken concept behind Luthier's Mercantile, and that created a familial feel and an awful lot of information that came out of LMI, much more information in a way than even product, and so we had people who were dependent upon calling us, and we'd spend hours on the phone with them to talk them through their projects, which was not a great way to make money, but it was the consciousness. So I think there was an awful lot of trust in the lutherie community when we put the call out there for that, and the timing was just good, and luthiers really will take a second look you have to sort of win their trust, I think that's part of the consciousness, but because of that, I think if it were anybody else putting that festival on, I don't know that it would have grown as fast. From Five Towns College people and from 20th Century Guitar magazine, but there really wasn't a major national show that was a place that everybody felt at home at. There were shows to support some of the archtop craziness, and there were shows that the Chenery World and all of that, but this was the first sort of, I think, really big festival for everybody. Everybody came, who by the second year, everybody wanted to be in it.
It got to be a little difficult. At a point we were thinking we have to invite people who are going to have nice guitars, and people who have been building for a while. We want to give some street cred, but at the same time we had a lot of customers who were really good customers whose chops may not have been up to snuff. So it was sort of a balancing act, but we decided in the end it's good to have all levels because everybody learns from everybody, and there's a guy that might have a $2,000 guitar, there'll be a customer there for him. It's nice to put people together.
I think all shows have an arc. All of these guitar shows, from what I see, the significant ones that exist in the country, whether it's Woodstock or it's this one, they develop an arc and they have a life. They go for a certain time, and I think we were, it corresponded so much with the boom in lutherie and the boom in computer available information, and you would put this catalog together, which brought everybody to one learning source. Still tell people to get this catalog on eBay, find a copy of it because it's so complete. It was a really incredible period. We were just very lucky to have been, we were both lucky and unlucky to have been there at that time because it was almost uncontrollable. Healdsburg became a lutherie mecca because of this. The whole concept of LMI was built on not just guitars, but information. And that is part of the cult of guitar makers, and I think that's really lubricated the way. But I was one of many, many people who were, the Luthier's Mercantile at that point was sort of a hub for the whole industry because of the information. And I don't think you can underestimate that in terms of how the festival developed, because the need for shows is always there. They just have different personalities they take on depending on the era. It allowed me to throw big parties here and just be part of, to do whatever I could to welcome all of my national family here, and that's how I felt about it. It wasn't about aggrandizement, it was just that you came to our town, we were going to make sure you had some place to go in the evening and have a great time. Really, really beautiful time, and very lucky for us. There's a funny story. When we first went to Montreal, I took my wife to the first Montreal show in Mario Beauregard, who is certainly a character we all love. He hosted a dinner for about 20 of us, and he brought the world's greatest sommelier who had just beaten the French on their own turf. And this guy brought not hundreds, but probably 10 bottles of wine from his personal cellar. We had an incredible 5-course meal. It was spectacular, and the questions were asked to us, like, what was the winemaker thinking when he named this wine the cello wine, this kind of thing. And by around 2 hours into this, we were all completely hammered. It was the most incredible, wonderful experience. And so my wife thinks whenever I go to a guitar show, this is what I do. When I tell her, no, we're sleeping in an ashtray. To this day, those shows that have that familial feel are the ones that draw makers back to every year. Nothing is static, and so I never like to think that we'll ever reproduce exactly that thing. So I think whatever shows now are created will develop their own arc and their own beauty. Renaissance people, they were multidisciplined folks who wound up in this world because they could work with physics and they could work with science, they could work with wood, and they could work with music, and all of these elements are extraordinary if you can bring them together. And because of the sharing, which is really your question, like the guild kind of created, Tim and Deb kind of created the guild, and everybody was sharing information very openly. I think that was sort of supplanted a little later by YouTube, because that all kind of came after, and that kind of changed that world as well, the sort of the information that was available. But to this day, my biggest competitors in my corner of the world are my best friends, and in the industry, and that spirit really hasn't changed. I think there's so much a fabric of this business, and paying it forward is a big part of this business, and you always did that. When I came to work for Todd, I learned 2 things. One was I learned how to treat people who work for you, because he was an example of how to do that. But I also had a real good sense of, it was the first time I ever ran into a business that was the hub of that kind of consciousness. The business actually grew around that kind of consciousness. So we would spend, even though it was not good business, we'd spend an hour on the phone with somebody who would ruin their 12th guitar. Sometimes we had a whole cult of people who would, sometimes I thought they would break their guitars just to call in and talk to us. In a normal business, we would have been being chased around by the bottom line people saying, get off the phone. But that was just not part of our consciousness. You have a very loyal group of people who will take care of each other. And most of the people I know in this business have bent over backwards to take care of each other. I think that we have a very self-patrolling, we still kind of look out for each other, and I love that about this business. It's very unusual. And it's bothered me a lot to see some of the most brilliant people that I know who are in their 60s and early 70s who are living a fairly hand-to-mouth existence, who've given away their information for years. I think on the one hand, there has to be a balance between that But the answer is not to close it up and make it proprietary. It's to share it, but it's to find a way to help those people who maybe could use a little help now. That really became the core to me of what became Healdsburg's scene and the festival. Makers they all, for the most part, were very, very well behaved, and they shared information like no other business I've ever seen. LMI era and the era of really having it happen in a big way there spanned the development of the net and the fact that it became available to everybody. So all that's had a very marked effect on the way Luthiers share information now, the way people study. And, I always encourage people to come and study with masters in person because you get a whole other level of learning from them. You learn about their philosophy about marriage and dogs and life. But more than that, you learn, I think one of the benefits of these guys being here now is not, they're all very good with their hands. And what I can show them is what I can show them, but what they're going to really see is what I have to do every day to survive as a guitar maker, as an artist or an artisan, whatever we are. And about 40% of the time I'm not here because I'm on the phone or I'm trying to get something to happen. As I saw it when I went to LMI and you were so busy. So, it's sort of that way that things happen and where the business is today. It's a very different waterfront than it was in 1990. And not necessarily worse, not necessarily better, but just different. And I learned very much when I went to work for Todd that the wood suppliers were our allies and our great friends. Before that, my attitude was, let's see what kind of deal we can get out of the wood guys. Now I really understand how that business is integrated together. You wouldn't have done this if you didn't love some of that material as much as it drove you crazy sometimes. I mean, it was, the passion has to fuel everything. So much more professionally crafted than they were even 10 years before at the first Healdsburg festivals. When we have those events, the whole bar has been lifted by that information that's out there. And it's interesting because even the makers that were making product that would be considered less on a lower strata were still better than what I saw 20 years ago, from that baseline. So there's been this huge learning curve, and it's brought everybody up. It's very interesting. I'm being very interested to see what we see at Santa Barbara and what kind of. But the work was pretty magnificent. I didn't see any sloppy work almost at all, and it was kind of nice to see that. It was stunning actually. Geez, these guys are 25 and they're better than me. That's a good thing because it makes you better. But it was really nice. It was actually kind of rewarding to see that because I think when you look at the effect that you might have had on the business, or any one of us coming through in those years, I think that really did have that effect. I think we're at another part in the development of the instrument where many people feel that the golden age of American frenetic guitar sales, may have passed, and to some extent, I think that the frenetic baby booming generation who are buying like mad, those people are 60, 70 now. I think there's less of that now, but the quality of what's being made is continuously elevating. And that is pretty spectacular. I'm stunned every time I see it. I don't think I answered your question either.